If the average person wanted to match Elon Musk's net worth, they'd have to work for 8 million years. That's 30 times longer than humans have even existed on Earth. And in the time it's taken me to say that, Elon has probably made another $100,000. But here's the twist. Elon isn't even the richest person in history, not even close. If you think about the billions, the yachts, the space rockets, compared to some historical figures, it all looks like pocket change. Today, we're going on a journey through time to uncover the people who made Elon, Jeff Bezos, and Bill Gates combined look like they were playing with Monopoly money. The term richest person might sound simple, but it's actually complicated. Are we talking cash in hand, control over resources, or political power that can command entire economies? Because if you look purely at money, the story is very different than if you consider influence, assets, or empire-scale wealth. We'll explore everyone from modern tech moguls to medieval kings, from infamous dictators to visionary industrialists, and even rulers whose wealth was so massive it reshaped entire continents. Some of them didn't even need cash. They had control over everything around them. Some were spending literal billions on rubber bands just to hold their stacks of money together. Others controlled armies, trade routes, and entire continents. And the craziest part? Some of these individuals didn't even live lavishly themselves. They were sitting on unimaginable wealth, but to them it was just power, tools to shape the world in ways money alone could never buy. We'll start in modern times with the names you already know: Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and Bill Gates. Together, they're worth more than $500 billion. That's unfathomable, right? But when we travel back through history, we'll meet people whose wealth, when adjusted for inflation and economic share, dwarfs even these modern billionaires. By the end of this video, you'll have a new understanding of what it truly means to be the richest person in history. And one thing is certain, by the time you finish watching, your jaw will be on the floor. So buckle up. Let's find out who was richer than Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and Bill Gates combined. Let's start with the familiar faces: Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates. Elon alone has a net worth around $400 billion. Jeff is close behind at $150 billion, and Bill Gates around $130 billion. Combined, they're worth more than $500 billion. Sound impossible? It gets crazier. Imagine working every single day of your life, doing nothing but saving every penny just to reach Elon's net worth. At the average US salary, it would take millions of lifetimes. And yet, while we're doing the math, Elon is still making money. Hundreds of thousands in a minute, millions in a week. But for all the attention they get, there are people in history who make these tech giants look like children counting pennies. Meet Pablo Escobar, the infamous Colombian kingpin of cocaine. At the height of his empire, Pablo was raking in $420 million a week. That's $60 million a day. Adjusted for inflation, his net worth might have peaked around $80 billion. On paper, it's less than Elon. But here's the twist. Pablo's wealth was literally cash, mountains of it. He didn't have stock portfolios, tech shares, or government bonds. He had piles of greenbacks, stored in safe houses, warehouses, and even buried in fields. The madness doesn't stop there. He spent $2 billion a year just replacing damaged money. And he had to buy rubber bands by the ton to hold the stacks together. Literal billions of dollars in cash. No banks, no intermediaries, just money you could touch. In the realm of liquid cash, Pablo probably takes the crown. But as extreme as that is, cash isn't the only way to measure wealth. Sometimes the richest people didn't even need money. They controlled it. Enter Joseph Stalin, the Soviet dictator. Stalin wasn't buying yachts or private islands. In fact, he personally owned almost nothing besides his uniform, a few books, and his pipes. His official pay? Around $30,000 a month in today's dollars. That's decent, but not mind-blowing. So why is Stalin considered one of the richest men ever? because he controlled the entire Soviet economy: factories, farms, mines, and state resources. Everything belonged to him. He had power that far exceeded the cash in his pocket. And his influence wasn't abstract. When Stalin had a fatal stroke, no one dared call a doctor for 12 hours, afraid they'd be punished for acting without orders. His wealth was absolute, not personal, but total. So already we see the pattern. Being the richest person isn't just about cash. Some had mountains of money, others had control over entire economies, and sometimes it was a mix of both. Today's billionaires might have flashy tech and yachts, but history had rulers, gangsters, and industrialists whose influence and liquid wealth would make modern billionaires seem modest. Next, we're traveling back to the early 20th century, where dictators, industrialists, and political rulers each had their own unique versions of extreme wealth. Some made fortunes legally, some illegally, but all were eye-popping. Moving into the early 1900s, we see a different breed of wealth, not just money in the bank, but influence, innovation, and empire building. Let's start with Adolf Hitler. Before he rose to power, Hitler was broke. In 1909, he moved to Vienna to pursue art, but life didn't cooperate. Rejected from art school, he sold postcards and slept in hostels just to get by. Fast forward through World War I, a failed coup, and a prison sentence for his political misadventures. During those 9 months behind bars, he wrote Mein Kampf, a book that initially sold poorly, but history would soon change that.
By 1933, Hitler was in power, and suddenly his income streams multiplied. He forced the German government to buy millions of copies of his own book, hand them out to soldiers, newlyweds, and officials. He copyrighted his image, his speeches, and even cleverly avoided taxes. Donations from wealthy supporters poured in, amounting to billions in today's dollars. But the real wealth wasn't just cash, it was the resources and territory under his control. Nazi Germany conquered almost all of Europe, controlling trillions in resources and commanding millions of laborers. Hitler turned political and military power into a type of wealth few could imagine. Contrast that with Henry Ford, the industrial titan. Ford didn't conquer countries, but he changed the world and built a fortune doing it. In 1914, he made a radical move, doubling wages from $2.50 to $5 a day and cutting the work week from 6 days to 5. He revolutionized manufacturing with the assembly line, slashing production time for the Model T from 12 hours to 90 minutes. Cars became affordable, suburbs expanded, and the modern middle class was born. Ford's influence extended far beyond his $200 billion peak net worth. He reshaped society itself. And then there were the robber barons, the OG American tycoons. Cornelius Vanderbilt dominated railroads, Andrew Carnegie built an empire in steel, and John D. Rockefeller? He founded Standard Oil in 1870, crushing competitors and controlling 90% of America's oil refining by the 1880s. Antitrust laws eventually forced Standard Oil to break into 34 companies, but instead of losing money, Rockefeller's wealth skyrocketed. By 1913, his fortune amounted to 2% of the US GDP, potentially the largest personal wealth in modern history. These early 20th century figures illustrate a fascinating spectrum. Some built fortunes from innovation and efficiency, others from political manipulation or monopolistic control, and some a mix of both. The key takeaway? Wealth isn't just dollars. It's power, influence, and the ability to shape economies. Rockefeller's empire made him richer in proportion to the economy than many of today's billionaires. Ford changed society itself, and Hitler turned political dominance into an empire of resources. And yet, all of them pale in comparison to some of history's earlier titans, whose fortunes and influence stretched across entire continents or even the known world. Now, let's travel further back in time, to an era where wealth wasn't just measured in dollars, but in influence, networks, and control over entire economies. First, meet the Rothschild family. The year is 1744. The United States doesn't exist yet. Life expectancy hovers around 30. Cities have no electricity. In a small Jewish ghetto, Amschel Rothschild is born. He starts as a rare coin dealer, then evolves into a banker. But the real genius? He spreads his sons across Europe's financial capitals, London, Paris, Vienna, Naples, and Frankfurt, creating the first international banking network before telephones even existed. The Rothschilds financed wars, infrastructure projects like the Suez Canal, and governments in need of loans. Their reach was unmatched. But because Jews were legally barred from owning land or entering many industries, they focused on stocks, bonds, and debts, assets that couldn't easily be confiscated. They also used the infamous cousin technique to keep wealth inside the family. At their peak, the Rothschilds may have had an equivalent of $500 trillion in today's money. Individually, Nathan Rothschild might have peaked at $20 billion, but combined with family influence, unimaginable. Moving forward a century, we encounter Jacob Fugger, the German banker, born in 1459. He inherited a family business and transformed it into a powerhouse, financing emperors, wars, and church projects across Europe. At one point, the debt owed to Fugger by the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V amounted to hundreds of millions of dollars in today's dollars. His influence surpassed kings, and when church officials owed him too much, they resorted to selling indulgences, essentially paying for forgiveness to settle debts. Fugger also built social housing for 150 people still used today, with rules including 3 daily prayers for the Fugger family. At his peak, he controlled an equivalent of 2% of Europe's GDP, roughly $400 billion today. And now, the ultimate legend, Mansa Musa, king of the Mali Empire in 1324. If you think Rockefeller or Rothschild had wealth, wait until you hear this. Mali was overflowing with gold and salt, and Musa's control was nearly absolute. On his famous pilgrimage across Africa, he traveled with 60,000 attendants, hundreds of camels, and countless pounds of gold, distributing so much that local economies destabilized. And yes, he borrowed some of the gold back to fix the resulting market crashes. Historians estimate that Musa's wealth controlled about half of the world's gold supply at the time. Exact numbers are impossible, but common estimates put him at $400 billion, with some theories suggesting much higher. He didn't just hoard it, he flaunted it, leaving his mark on maps and in history as the original flexer. What sets Musa apart from modern billionaires is scale and context. He ruled a vast empire where gold wasn't just a commodity, it was political power, economic control, and divine prestige all in one. His wealth influenced the course of nations, trade routes, and local economies. Unlike Elon Musk, who commands a fortune in a complex global economy, Musa's wealth literally reshaped the world around him. So far, we've seen cash kings like Escobar, industrial titans like Rockefeller, banking dynasties like the Rothschilds, European financiers like Fugger, and Mansa Musa, the gold-laden king. Each one redefines wealth in different dimensions: liquid cash, industrial influence, financial networks, and resource control. Next, we're going even further back in time, to Genghis Khan, Augustus Caesar, and King Solomon, exploring how land, empire, and legendary treasures stack up against modern billionaires. Now, let's go further back in time, beyond banks, corporations, and gold hoards, to an era where wealth was measured in land, armies, and influence rather than dollars.
First up, Genghis Khan, born in 1162. By conquering the largest contiguous empire in history, he controlled nearly 20% of the world's land. Imagine that! Every river, pasture, and village across vast Eurasia fell under his authority. And while he didn't amass wealth for personal luxury, he wore the same clothes and ate the same food as his soldiers. His influence was unparalleled. Land, people, and resources flowed through him, creating a type of wealth impossible to replicate today. If we tried to estimate his net worth in today's terms, some historians peg it at $130 trillion, though much of it was distributed to loyal commanders rather than hoarded personally. Next, let's talk about Augustus Caesar, the first Roman emperor. Around 1 AD, Rome dominated the Mediterranean. Augustus personally controlled around 20% of Rome's economic output, including taxes, gold and silver mines, and conquered lands. He even had a grim money-making method, confiscating the wealth of the elite. By today's standards, his fortune would be valued at
$5 trillion. And unlike many modern billionaires, his wealth came with absolute political and military control. Gold and assets alone don't capture it. His influence reshaped an entire civilization. And then there's King Solomon, whose legend stretches into the realm of myth. Around 970 BC, Solomon ruled Israel and reportedly amassed tons of gold, exotic treasures, and gifts from surrounding kingdoms. The Bible mentions 666 talents of gold per year, plus ivory, spices, and tribute. Some estimates put his wealth at over $2 trillion in today's money, though historical accuracy is debated. What's clear is that Solomon represents the ultimate combination of divine mandate, political control, and vast resources, a type of wealth almost unimaginable to modern minds. These ancient figures redefine the very concept of rich. Cash, stocks, or property are modern metrics. Back then, wealth was control over lands, armies, tribute, and the loyalty of entire populations. Genghis Khan's empire spanned continents. Augustus's coffers flowed with the taxes of conquered peoples. Solomon's wealth was legendary, influencing stories, religion, and history itself. So when we think about who was richer than Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and Bill Gates combined, we can see that modern billionaires, for all their flashy net worth, operate in a very different world. The scale of influence, land, and resources commanded by historical figures often dwarfs today's fortunes when measured proportionally to their time. From cash kings like Escobar to industrial giants like Rockefeller, to banking dynasties, emperors, and legendary kings, each contender shows that wealth is more than just money. Influence, control, and scale often outweigh liquid assets, and the richest person in history isn't always who you think it is. Next, we'll dive into the final comparison, placing modern billionaires in historical context, analyzing GDP-adjusted wealth, influence, and accessibility. This will lead us to the ultimate conclusion about who truly deserves the title of the richest person to ever live. Now comes the part everyone's waiting for. How do modern billionaires like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and Bill Gates stack up against the titans of history? And who truly deserves the crown as the richest person to ever live? Let's start with the numbers. Elon Musk sits at around $400 billion, a staggering fortune. Combined with Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates, we're talking roughly $680 billion. That's enough to make most of us dizzy just imagining it. But remember, numbers alone don't tell the full story. We need to consider GDP-adjusted wealth, liquid assets, and influence over the world around them. Take John D. Rockefeller in 1913. He controlled 2% of the US GDP, which today would roughly translate to $400 to $600 billion. His fortune wasn't just on paper. It was tied to real resources, oil infrastructure, and a monopoly that shaped industries for generations. In terms of proportional influence, Rockefeller actually had a larger share of the economy than Elon does today. But the global economy has grown 22 times larger, meaning Elon's absolute wealth may be higher, but Rockefeller had a bigger slice of a smaller pie. Then there's Mansa Musa, whose pilgrimage through Africa left local economies in chaos simply because he handed out so much gold. He controlled half of the world's gold supply at the time, a level of concentrated wealth that's almost impossible to comprehend today. Even though his fortune is hard to quantify precisely, many historians agree it dwarfs anything we can see in modern times, when measured by resources controlled and the impact on society. Genghis Khan presents a different angle. His personal wealth might not have been high, but his empire controlled 20% of the world's land. Resources, tribute, loyalty of millions. He ruled an empire that made modern billionaires' influence look tiny. His net worth, in land and power terms, could reach $130 trillion, though much of it was distributed strategically to maintain loyalty rather than hoarded for himself. Augustus Caesar and King Solomon show similar patterns. Their wealth wasn't just money, it was political power, resource control, and societal influence. Caesar controlled Rome's economy and conquered territories. Solomon amassed legendary riches and strategic alliances. These types of wealth are fundamentally different from liquid cash, but arguably just as, if not more valuable in their time. So who is the richest person in history? If we measure by absolute money, modern billionaires lead. Elon Musk's fortune is documented, liquid, and verifiable. But if we measure by relative power, influence, and control of resources, historical figures like Mansa Musa, Genghis Khan, or Rockefeller have a strong claim. The ultimate takeaway is that wealth is not just numbers on a screen. It's influence, control, and impact. Modern billionaires live in the largest economy the world has ever seen, with access to technology and global markets that ancient kings could only dream of. But historical titans shaped entire continents, controlled armies, and literally dictated the flow of resources.
In the end, Elon Musk might be the richest in absolute terms, but history is full of individuals whose wealth, power, and influence far surpass anything we can fully quantify today. Every era has its giant, and the story of wealth isn't just about money, it's about the power to change the world. So next time you check Elon's net worth, remember, he's the richest fish in the biggest pond that has ever existed. But some historical giants weren't even playing in the same pond. They were creating oceans. Before we close, let's take a step back and look at all the contenders we've explored, because seeing them side by side really puts the scale of wealth into perspective. We started with modern billionaires, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and Bill Gates. Combined, their net worths hover around $680 billion. Musk alone has made more money than most people could ever dream of, even in multiple lifetimes. He has access to resources, technology, and opportunities that no human in history has ever had. Absolute wealth, unmatched. Liquid, verifiable, and extraordinarily flexible. Then there's Pablo Escobar, the literal cash king. Mountains of bills, warehouses of money, and $2 billion a year just in damaged notes. His fortune shows that cash itself can be a form of power. Meanwhile, Joseph Stalin controlled an entire state economy. He didn't need personal cash because he commanded the wealth of an empire, proving that control can equal riches without a single dollar in your pocket. In the industrial world, figures like Henry Ford, Cornelius Vanderbilt, Andrew Carnegie, and John D. Rockefeller show a different kind of wealth, building systems and empires that shape society. Ford's assembly line changed work, commuting, and the modern middle class. Rockefeller's Standard Oil made him richer than most modern billionaires relative to the economy of his time. The robber barons show us that influence, infrastructure, and innovation can create wealth beyond money itself. Going further back, Jacob Fugger and the Rothschilds dominated banking networks and finance centuries before modern technology existed. Fugger financed emperors and church projects. Rothschilds created international banking while avoiding persecution and political restrictions. Their fortunes were enormous in proportional terms, often controlling resources, governments, and trade networks. And then there's Mansa Musa, who literally reshaped economies on his pilgrimage, distributing gold in such abundance that markets crashed. Controlling half of the world's gold supply at the time, he embodies the idea that wealth isn't just money, it's economic power and symbolic dominance. Even older still, Genghis Khan commanded 20% of the world's land. Augustus Caesar controlled Rome's economy and conquered territories. King Solomon amassed legendary treasures and gifts from nations. These ancient figures had wealth measured in influence, territory, armies, and resources, forms of riches that modern billionaires can't directly compare to. So who wins? It depends on how you define wealth. In absolute, verifiable money, Elon Musk is king. But if you consider power, influence, control, and proportional economic dominance, historical giants like Mansa Musa, Rockefeller, and even Genghis Khan take the crown. Here's the real takeaway. Wealth is multi-dimensional. It's money, yes, but also power, impact, and the ability to shape the world around you. Every era has its mega-rich, and each used different tools to reach the top.
Modern billionaires operate in the biggest, richest pond humanity has ever seen. Historical titans built oceans, empires, and systems that changed the course of history itself. The richest person ever? There's no simple answer, but one thing is certain. Looking across history, every single one of these figures makes Elon Musk look like just another player, albeit in the largest game ever played. So next time you check a billionaire's net worth, remember, wealth isn't just numbers. It's power, legacy, and the scale at which you can influence the world. And in that measure, some of history's richest still stand taller than anyone alive today.